is being used as a replacement for animal therapy in nursing homes, which is really kind of awesome.
So she builds planets on Earth, you guys.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Museum of Science Boston, and of course, our very special program tonight, Rescuing Science. I'm James Monroe. My pronouns are he, him. I am the creative director of programming in our Centers for Public Science Learning here at the museum, and I'm so thrilled to welcome you all to this really incredible evening. We are so excited to have our dear friend, Dr. Paul M. Sutter, back here at the museum, celebrating his upcoming release, Rescuing Science, Restoring Trust in an Age of Doubt. And he will be joined on stage tonight by Dr. Hakeem Oluseyi, who is making his Museum of Science stage debut. We're so excited to have him here as well. And the two of them have a fascinating conversation in store for all of us. And we just want to thank Paul for not only thinking of us to be a part of this release, but to be the launch event for this book. So we're really excited to have them here tonight. And tonight is work that is coming out of our Centers for Public Science Learning here at the museum, specifically our Center for the Environment. And it's important to note that the centers are not actual locations here at the museum. Instead, these are our people, our partnerships, and our products. And there are three active centers currently: our Center for Environment, our Center for Life Sciences, and our Center for Space. And it is the role of these centers and our teams to infuse the intellectual and creative capital of the wider community here into the museum, and to translate that into our different products, our different exhibits, experiences, and more, all to inspire a lifelong love of science in everyone. And we do that through programming just like tonight, as well as what we call our year-long content spotlights. And this is when the museum focuses on one overarching content theme for the year. And we're so excited that 2024 is the year of our Earth Shot, where we'll be focused on climate change, sustainability, and resiliency. And teams across the entire institution will be launching new exhibits, programs, and more, all centered on climate issues and solutions, including tonight's conversation and Paul's book, which centers on how we can build bridges between scientific industries and the communities that need it the most through science topics just like climate change. And to give you just a little bit of a preview of what's already been happening in our Center for Environment and work that's coming out of the center and where we're going over the next course of the year, we have an awesome little video for you to check out, so enjoy.
We know what to do. We have the tools, we have the knowledge, but do we have the will?
Once the water starts to rise, and that is out of sight, she'll want the devil on her teeth.
Today, the biggest question I get as a climate scientist is, what can I do about it?
What you know about your neighborhood can really help to have these conversations about how we can make our neighborhoods more resilient.
It begins.
I wanna fly, can you take me far away? Give me a star.
Climate change, all of this is science.
And I'll go so
El Nino is coming.
How will rising sea levels impact air travel?
touch the ground.
How can youth make big changes in their community that help relieve the effects of the climate crisis?
That all
And again, that's just a taste of what we've been cooking up in the Center for the Environment and what's to come over the course of the year. We hope you'll come back and enjoy Earthshot programming all throughout 2024. And tonight, as a part of Paul and Hakeem's conversation, they will have a chance to take questions from all of you. So whether you are watching at home online, thank you for tuning in, or you're here in person with us, you can submit a question at any time by pulling out those smartphones and going to slido.com and entering the code Rescuing Science, all one word, just as it appears on the screen behind me. And for those who are here in person tonight, after their conversation, we invite you to join us one level down for a book signing. You can buy copies of both Rescuing Science and Hakeem's book, A Quantum Life. They will both be on sale. They'll be signing copies afterwards, so make sure you grab a copy of each. But now it's my really great honor to welcome to the stage our special guests tonight. Dr. Hakeem Oluseyi is a renowned astrophysicist, captivating science television presenter, and a global education advocate. And Dr. Paul M. Sutter is a theoretical cosmologist, a NASA advisor, author, host, U.S. cultural ambassador, and a visiting professor at Barnard College, Columbia University. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Hakeem and Paul.
How's it going?
It is going well. All right, so I'm the moderator, so that means I get to guide the conversation. So I'm going to start off with a little story about my bromance for Paul. Does anyone here watch How the Universe Works? Everyone, okay. That's how I encountered Paul for the first time. So I'm a bit older than Paul. So when I saw this guy, I thought young whippersnapper. All right, he's unique, though, to me, because what I saw in him was sincerity. And I saw a guy who spoke his mind, and a guy who seemed to really value his audience. And I don't, in a lot of science communication, especially on television, it doesn't feel that way for me, but you felt that way. So I was like, who is this dude? Let me find out more about him. So while shopping in a mall, I went to the coffee shop and saw your previous book. And I just sat there enjoying my coffee and reading your book, and I'm like, I really like this guy. So thank you for inviting me to share this moment with you. All right?
Thank you, Hakeem.
Yeah.
I can't say enough how much of an honor it is to share this space with you and to talk about these things that are also very passionate to you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And thank you all for joining us, as well as everyone at home who's watching via live stream. And I have to say, I once spoke at the... What is that place in New York at the planetarium, Hayden?
Yeah.
Yeah, they gave me beer.
Oh.
Just saying, Museum of Science of Boston. So, we're in Cambridge. It's kind of a hot, world's top universities here. Yeah. Let's keep it highbrow. Let's go for, the scientific results. Tell me about, I learned this for the first time in your book, poop in beards.
Yeah.
That did not have the comedic effect I expected.
Yeah. So there, in this book, I talk about a lot of issues that I've identified in the relationship between science and society. And one of the ways that science interfaces with the public is through the news,
right? Through
news articles, through blog posts, through media, and this is a very, very broken connection. Because the goal of news media is not to accurately translate scientific research and represent the latest nuanced thinking on some topic. The goal of news media is to make money, and they make money by selling as many newspapers as possible, by getting as many eyeballs as possible.
Right.
And so we end up with situations with ridiculous headlines. Like there's poop in everyone's beard because there's like fecal matter in everybody's bathroom just floating around, and it ends up in your beard and your toothbrush. And like, it's kind of technically true at some microscopic level, but also totally useless information. And yet, that is a major headline that is supposed to represent the latest in scientific thinking. And right. It makes for a sensational headline. It makes for people very interested in it. But it doesn't really represent what we are trying to do as scientists.
Yeah, it can make people think that we're wasting their tax dollars on stupid scientific investigations, right?
Absolutely,
Yeah,
and I think this is where people get the impression that science is a waste of time, or scientists have no idea what we're doing, because there was an actual study that was publicly funded that did investigate the nature of poop in beards. I'm trying to say this with a phrase. That was a great way to open. The research was trying to look at the spread of disease, and are there other ways to keep our bathrooms are hygienic, but that's not what came out.
Right.
That's not what came out in the headline.
Yeah. Believe it or not, I was once a part of a research team. It was Russians and Americans, and it was going to be the UNESCO satellite. And what killed it was such a headline.
Really?
Yeah, because one of the experiments was how to recycle astronaut waste and turn it into fuel. And the headline that came out about it used that word,
Yep.
right? And everybody pulled out of the project.
Yeah, because
Yeah,
it seems
killed by
stupid.
that. Because it
seems
seems stupid.
childish.
Exactly. It was
Yeah.
reduced by that. So let's get on something that's a little more
Less poop focused.
less poop focused. And this is something that, there are scientists out there that are seriously anti-religious. And aside from that, you don't really see scientists talking about religion in a serious way, right? And now personally, I don't think that's good for us. I think that, I start at humanity. So what I've always said is that there's two types of truths. There's actual veridic truth, then there's human truth. So if human truth tends to win. So for example, witches aren't a real thing. But if the audience decide that you and I are witches and they go burn us at the stake, we're dead.
Feels pretty real.
It feels pretty real, right? So you have to deal with the human first, right? Break down barriers, make connections. As scientists, our lifeblood depends on the public. Yeah. And I go around speaking all over the world, and I hear people say to me after talks, because I talk about cosmology as well, and there's allegedly these conflicts between science and religion. And people ask me, when it comes to origins, origin of the earth, origin of the universe, and then there's other areas, Dr. O, you said science says this, but the Quran says this, or the Bible says this. What are your thoughts about the so-called conflict? Because that's a part of the book.
It is.
Yeah, the so-called conflict between religion and science.
Yeah, like throughout this book, I'm examining the relationship between science and society. And I'm noting the erosion of trust that the public has of scientists, which we see in Pew Research polls. Prior to the pandemic, 74% of Americans, just to set up this answer, 74% of Americans trusted scientists and believed that scientists had the nation's best interests when they go to do their work. After the pandemic, the latest poll in October 2023 was at 57%.
Wow.
We lost 1/6 of Americans during the pandemic. 1/6 of Americans no longer trust scientists. And so what this book is about is trying to find, one, why did that happen? Why did we lose trust? What are we doing to lose trust? And then what can we do to fix it? And I can't, if I encounter someone, and I encounter a lot of people that are very anti-science, that are very outspoken, critical of science, I don't know how to change their minds. I don't. But I know how to change myself.
Should you want to change your mind?
I am always trying to change my mind. I'm trying to embody that scientific spirit of letting the evidence guide my beliefs and trying to change. Whatever we're doing with our relationship with the public is not working. So I'm trying to speak to scientists and to fans of science, say maybe we should try to make ourselves more worthy of trust. One of those ways is how science as an institution sets itself up in relation to other fields of inquiry. And you're right, you will find many scientists and many fans of science and many science communicators absolutely trashing religion, faith, philosophy, art, the humanities, anything that's not science. They will put science on a pedestal. And actually, I used to believe this when I was a young, foolish man. I believe that, it's science or nothing. Like, if you don't arrive at a conclusion through the scientific method, using evidence-based, rationality, then it's just stupid. And surprise, surprise, this doesn't work. That when you go up to people and you say, hey, you're stupid for believing the thing you believe, that doesn't work on me, so I don't know why I thought it would work on anyone else. So we have to change the narrative. I do not believe that there is a conflict between science and religion. There is not a conflict between science and philosophy, between science and art, and science and dance, and science and the humanities, and science and law, and science and economics. There's no conflict here. Because we all approach the world as individuals. We all craft our own narratives. We all craft our own sets of beliefs. We all arrive at decisions with different steps and with different strategies. And yeah, I love the scientific worldview. I love empiricism and rationality and evidence-based, and it's a beautiful guide for studying the world. Also, the vast majority of decisions that I make in my life are not based on the scientific method.
Right.
Right?
Yeah,
when I'm trying to choose what to eat for dinner, I don't make 2 dinners simultaneously and blind myself and taste this, and okay, I'll have this. No.
You write a code?
No, I don't create a simulation of I just cook what sounds good in the moment.
Right,
I just follow my gut. We make decisions with a variety of tools at our disposal. Some of those are evidence-based. Some of those are based in science. Some of those are faith-based. Some of those are just gut-level, instinctual, reasons that we can't even put a finger on. So I don't believe that there is a conflict, and that we as scientists need to stop saying things like that there is a conflict, or we're out to get people, or we're out to disprove people. No, there are so many beautiful ways to explore the universe. Science is one of those ways. It's a beautiful and powerful way, but it is just one strand in the tapestry of human exploration of this weird and wonderful universe that we find ourselves in.
Right. And not only that, I think, but academia has whereas a lot of science takes place in universities, has a reputation for elitism. So if you come, and please, I speak my mind too. When I came into the world of science, I went into the West. I went to Stanford University. I came out of Mississippi. And because of history and the way things were in Mississippi, I had developed what I call racist radar. All right? And one of the things would trigger my racist radar is if you talk to me like you're superior to me. Guess how physicists talk to people?
All the time.
Right? So I had to learn, you're not a racist, you're just a jerk.
You're just a physicist.
Right, you're just a physicist, right? But another thing that comes to mind is when I go home to Mississippi, there was this anti-science among some people, and they say, man can't know everything. And so I started coming up with a phrase, because you brought up something really good in your book, and that's about forward projection, right? So I tell people, I don't do prophecy or prognostication unless I can calculate it with physics. It's one thing to calculate it with physics, a very different thing to calculate it with biology, right? And so what I say is, science ain't science. Because the example someone gives to me in Mississippi is, I had a friend, the doctor gave him 3 weeks to live. That was 700 years ago.
Yep.
He's still kicking, right? And I'm like, it's very different if you make a prediction about what an atom is doing and what's going to happen to a person. But let's turn the tables a little bit and talk about the gauntlet. Because one of the problems I have, the second I stepped into graduate school, they're like, hey, get out there and encourage people to become scientists. And I was torn because I was catching hell. And I was like, for me, I was the first person in my family to graduate high school. So, I was doing minimum wage jobs before I didn't even think I could do anything beyond that, right? And I lost my train of thought.
The gauntlet.
Oh, the gauntlet. Yeah. So the thing is that coming from my background, even as hard as it is, it's still a step up in life, right? But the pathway is fraught. Describe that for the audience, because we get asked all the time, how do I become an astrophysicist?
Yep, all the time. And you're right, we as a society encourage people to get STEM degrees. If you don't want to be a burger flipper at McDonald's, you need a degree in science, technology, engineering, or math. And one of the reasons I believe that we are losing the trust of the public is that we as scientists, we're lying. We're lying. And it breaks my heart every time when a little kid comes up to me and says, how do I be an astrophysicist? Or a parent comes up to me and says, my kid is interested in all this space stuff. I have no idea what's going on. Like, how can they get a job? And I have to tell them, because I have to be honest, there are no jobs in science.
In science, in research. It's like professional sports, right?
Yeah.
If you want to play basketball, you want to be LeBron. Chances are you're going to be the trainer.
Yeah.
you're
going to be the guy that hands the towels to the trainer.
Right. Yeah.
For
or high school coach, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like here, the statistics. These are numbers. Like for every 10 science PhDs that we produce every single year, there is one open faculty position. We are outproducing scientists by a factor of 10. We have 10 times too many science PhDs. And that's not even like bachelor's. Now, the good news is that anyone with a physics degree or an astronomy degree has essentially zero unemployment rate. They do find a job somewhere, and they have, a wonderful quality of life. But that's not why they got into a bachelor's degree in physics or astronomy or any field of science. That's not why they got into a PhD program. They went to do science, and then we don't tell them. And I experienced this myself. Nobody talked about the fact that most of the people in my class would not end up being professional scientific researchers in academia or industry or government or anywhere. PhDs, 1/3 of them, of science PhDs, have no plans post-graduation. They have no job lined up. They have no interview.
Oh.
You're one of those.
Well, I had a job lined up eventually, but I literally had no life plan beyond getting a PhD. It was like, done.
Yeah, you're just like, okay, I got it, I guess.
Yeah.
And so if we want to restore trust, and again, this is like looking inwards about what scientists and science-loving people can think about and talk about, is to be honest and transparent.
So what happens to the young people who get into science?
Well, they start off in undergrad, which is 4 or 5 years, and usually costs by now like $100,000 minimum. It's insanely competitive to get into good schools, like Ivy League, top-tier universities, in order to even get your foot in the door. And so if you're just some rando at some high school in the middle of nowhere and you're interested in science, you are competing against kids who went to boarding school or prep school, who have connections and were able to get research, like a high school level research, so that they could have like maybe a publication to their name, like everything's lined up for them. You're competing against them.
And don't forget the Nepo babies. In my research group, 3 of the 5 other graduate students, their fathers were PhD physicists at a high level.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like connections matter, like they always do. And if you get your bachelor's in a scientific degree and you're interested in a PhD program, you have to compete. You have to take examinations, the graduate record exam with various specialties. You have to have done some sort of research during your undergraduate career. You need some sort of connections to potential advisors at graduate school. Typically in the sciences, the graduate school is paid for. You will spend years teaching in order to pay for your graduate education. Graduate school experience, it's like boot camp for the brain, which can be good. I treasure my graduate school experience. Also, something like 60% of graduate students report experiencing burnout and stress and anxiety, have reported having to seek mental health counseling for their experiences. Over 3/4 of graduate students work more than 60 hours a week, and for very, very little pay. And then eventually, if you get a PhD, and then by the way, there are no jobs. And what I believe we need to do is change the narrative and change the expectations and manage expectations. And tell people, if you have kids, if you have relatives, like apply for STEM degrees, do it. Like going to college, if you want to explore physics and learn physics, learn physics. It's amazing. Physics is kind of awesome. Yeah. But we need to be very, very clear that there are very few opportunities for a lifelong career in research, but instead, we will arm you with tools. We will train you in analytic methods, computational methods. We will teach you how to think abstractly, to learn very quickly, and those are incredibly valuable skills that many companies around the world are willing to pay top dollar for, and make that explicit. Make it clear that when you enter a PhD program in physics, the expectation should be that you go into industry. The expectation should be that you make a massive salary and you have a wonderful work-life balance and you live in a beautiful location on Earth because that's what you can do. The expectation should not that you become a lifelong researcher in science because that is simply not the reality. And as long as we keep up that fiction, we are creating, for every one PhD that ends up in that faculty position, we are creating 9 that are disillusioned with the concept of fundamental research. And that is dangerous.
Yeah, it sounds like, to me, like college sports.
Yeah.
Right? It really sounds like college sports. I've seen it, where you have these guys, they've dedicated their whole lives. They've been taken care of. They're, like I just saw an interview from professional athletes. They're like, yeah, someone else does your homework. Someone does your laundry for you. You are taken care of. You don't go pro, boom, you're dropped.
Done.
And you're just out there in the world. I felt that way, having my background, and I went to Stanford University, somehow it tricked me into thinking I was rich too. And then I graduated. And I'm like, no, I'm broke as hell. Y'all better laugh at my jokes.
I'll laugh at your jokes.
They're subtle. It's called dry humor. You gotta, yeah. But yeah, I thought I was rich too. Then you graduate, you're out there on your own. So let's take a turn. So you talked about a lot about one of the difficulties that we need to, or one of the challenge for rescuing science is this lack of trust. You keep saying that.
Yeah.
Now there's a couple of phenomena that say scientists may have earned some lack of trust.
Yeah.
So talk to us about the persistence of fraud.
This is one of the biggest issues, and this is how I open the book. There is a culture that we have in science, and it's summed up by a simple phrase. It's called publish or perish.
Right.
You either write papers or your career is done. And when I was a graduate student, when I was a postdoc, which is a temporary research position that you have to do 2 or 3 of before you're even considered for faculty
What
position.
do medical doctors call when they do that?
They're on a residency.
Residency, like
Yes,
residency.
Residency, but you have to do a couple of them.
Yeah.
And then even then, if you do a residency and you want to keep being a doctor, there's generally a doctor position open for you. For scientists, you do 2 or 3 of these short-term positions, you move all over the world, and then there's no job for you. There's no faculty position for you, like typically. And in order to keep advancing your career, you have to keep writing papers. I would ask consistently any senior researcher I encountered, how do I become a professor? How do I do this? How do I do this? And the answer every single time was keep writing papers. And a paper, for those of you who don't know, it's just a short article, say 5 to 20 pages long, that summarizes some of your latest research.
That you, by the way, in order to publish, you have to pay $110 per page.
Oh, it's more now.
Oh, is it?
Oh, it's gone
yeah.
up. No, everything's more expensive now.
Yeah,
No. So, yes, in order to publish in a journal, you have to cough up cash.
Yeah.
On a lower tier journal, we're talking $1,000 to $2,000
Yep.
for a typical paper. If you want to publish in Nature, the top tier, I just looked up this number today because it came up in a different conversation. If you and me write an article and we're like, I think we should publish this in Nature, the top scientific journal in the world, it will cost us $12,900.
What?
I'm not joking. $12,900 to publish in Nature. So that's one set of problems, which is how do scientists from lower income communities or lower income backgrounds or not access connections to grant money or from other countries, like not wealthy American or European countries, how do they publish? The answer is they don't. Or they succumb to predatory publishing, or they say, oh, give me $500, I'll publish, and it's some junk journal that I just made up. It's a whole industry. So that's one barrier itself. Like keep telling people, keep publishing, but also you have to pay up. And then the other issue is, because of this pressure, you are constantly trying to publish. You're constantly trying to get papers out. I experienced this. I did that. One year, I authored or co-authored a dozen papers.
Wow.
Which is huge, like insane. A paper a month on average, because I needed to get papers out because I want to be a professor, and if you want to be a professor, you have to write papers. So I'm going to write papers. What this creates is one, a gigantic flood of papers. Can you guess? I don't know. How many papers were published last year, approximately? Just scientific papers.
18,000.
18,000? Any guesses in the audience? How many scientific papers were published worldwide last year? 500,000? 5.1 million.
Really?
5.1 million.
So we're about to be Star Trek at any moment.
No, we're not, and that's the sad thing. There are over 30,000 English language journals in the world.
Wow.
Publishing 5 million papers a year across all fields of science. And so you just have to publish, and what you do, in order to keep up this level of output, it's inhumane, it's impossible, so you start slacking off. So you get lazy research. You get sloppy research. You get pointless, stupid research. Yes, some scientific research is stupid because the point of it is not to advance human knowledge. The point is to crank out another paper. And you also create the conditions where fraud can persist and grow like black mold. And there's nothing anyone can do about it because people can just lie and make up data and make up their results. And there aren't enough people around to cross-check the results, to verify the results.
And the incentives aren't there to do that either.
And the incentives, you're better off trying to fake it because the rewards are great. You know, you get research grants, you get promotion, you get tenure, you get shortlisted for Nobel Prizes. And then if you're caught, sometimes you're fired.
Sometimes?
Sometimes you're not.
Wow.
There's one very famous example. I held a position at The Ohio State University, and we had a professor there in biomedical research, Dr. Crockey, and he was exposed so much data in his papers, and he had a machine. He had like 20 researchers working for him, publishing dozens of papers a year. Fabrication of data. They would just copy images here and there, alter things here and there in their images just to make it work. Huge expose, caught, had to retract articles from journals. He's still working at Ohio State University.
Wow.
Why? Because he brings in $20 million a year in grant money, and OSU gets 25% of that off the top. Every single year. It's a source of income. So of course they're not going to fire him because they want to keep making money.
Of course.
And we don't have enough safeguards. We're drowning in a sea of papers. And so when you see headline after headline after headline of like weird and contradictory results or like pointless research, it's because, we're not doing a good job. And there's fraudulent research. And when that is exposed to the public, when wrong, incorrect, lazy, shoddy, and just outright lying, fabricated research is exposed to the public, of course they are going to lose trust in scientists because it looks like we're a bunch of liars.
Absolutely.
And we have no good defense against it. We can't say, oh no, of course they're bad apples, they're evil people, but we cross-check it and we squash them like a bug.
Right.
And that doesn't happen because we're all trying to publish as much as possible.
But 5 minutes ago, you did say we all are liars.
Yes. Did I?
When it comes to recruiting students.
Oh, yeah. So we lie to the public, and then we lie to ourselves. We say we're advancing science, but really we're creating the conditions where fraud can exist. Fraud has skyrocketed. Rates of retraction have skyrocketed.
Fraud is one of the riskiest things you can do because you can get caught, and then you're done. But you have a paragraph in a book saying that one of the big problems is avoidance of risk. So how do you follow persistence of fraud with avoidance of risk?
That's a great point. So one chapter I focus on the persistence of scientific fraud, which is just making up results in this effort to publish as much as possible. And I distinguish, there's like hard fraud, which is like outright lying, and then there's soft fraud, which is just lazy, shoddy, junk research. I encounter, my wife is in the audience and so are my stepsons, and they come to me, they'll say like, what is this headline? I'm like, okay, let me look, and I'll read the paper. I'm like, oh, it's just junk. It's just
Yeah.
junk. It was poorly done science.
Yeah.
The statistical rigor isn't there. This shouldn't have passed peer review, but like someone published it. So on one side, you have scientists willing to risk their reputation because they need to publish, and they need to make big splashy results in order to advance their career. On the other side of the coin, you have the funding situation. Almost all fundamental research is funded by public grants. We're talking the National Science Foundation, NASA, the Department of Energy, National Institute of Health, like big government agencies fund the vast majority of fundamental research in science. And grant funding agencies are conservative, not politically conservative, but deeply unwilling to spend money on risky ideas. When you have a grant idea, when you have an idea like, hey, I've got a research direction I'd like to pursue. I know I'll write a grant, I'll ask for some money so I can hire some assistants, or I can carve out time for myself so I can pay Nature the publication charges for my eventual Nobel Prize winning work. Right. I will ask for that money. Grant and funding agencies are so hyper-conservative that when you have just a crazy idea, it will never get funded. You will never get the money for it. Because what the granting agencies tend to prefer is tiny little advances.
Absolutely.
Tiny little changes. Like, okay, so that study we did last year with 5 mice, we're going to do with 10 mice this year. Or that observing program where we studied this clump of stars last year, now we're going to study that clump of stars. These are safe bets. Yeah. These are quantifiable bets. Say we measured that quantity last year to 5% precision. Now we are going to build a new observatory and we're going to measure this quantity to 3% precision. And grant and funding agencies like this very low risk approach because it ensures guaranteed results. Because if you can say, oh, I've done it before and I'm just doing it again, just a tiny little twist, you're likely to have papers that are worth publishing.
There's a side effect of that too. It's not just that we're going to fund this similar work, it's that we're going to fund this same person.
Exactly.
Yeah, or the same team.
Established researchers are much more favored in grant funding applications. And this data comes from the National Science Foundation itself. They do annual reviews on who gets what awards. Surprise, surprise, most of the awards go to like 10 universities in the United States, and you could probably name them. Some of them are nearby. They laughed at that one.
But that hits home for me, man, because I submitted a proposal and I had this, hot shot young career. And I looked at my peers and I said, hey, that person got a mission and I've done more. I've accomplished more than them. Yeah. Right? So I'm a sure shot. I get my review back, 3 reviewers, excellent, excellent, very good, you're not funded.
Done.
Yeah. So I called one of the people I know he had to be involved. And he goes, hey, man, yeah, it was good, looks like good stuff. But the problem you have is we don't know you.
Yep.
Right? All right. I have time for one more question.
Okay.
Before we open it up to you all and also everyone who's watching online. Some questions have come in. What are some of the solutions to all of these problems? It's called rescuing science.
Yes.
So it's not, let me tell you what sucks in science. It's rescuing science. So let's talk about.
Yeah.
And don't give away the book because we want people to buy it. But
yeah, there's a cool ending. There's a twist at the end.
Oh yeah, yeah. It turns out that Paul is really Albert Einstein.
Yeah, I wish.
The child of Albert Einstein and Amelia Earhart.
That's cool. I'll take that.
Or is it Gotti? I don't know.
What I believe we need to do is to change how scientists approach the public. We need to reform our own institutions, and we need to engage with the public differently. We need to either hire fewer students, like bring in fewer students, or we need to massively expand the opportunities that they have. We need to be honest with our incoming students. We need to slow down. The only people who have decided that we need to publish a lot are the scientists. We can just decide. It's like all of my solutions that I propose are not necessarily easy, but they're simple. Because all these systems were put in place by scientists.
Right.
We could not publish as much. We cannot insist that you need 5 papers before you graduate your PhD. We cannot insist that you need 20 papers in order to get tenure. We could decide a reduced publication output is okay. Multiple Nobel Prize winners from years past have said, I could not have done my research in today's environment because I'm not given enough time.
Yes, I've heard that.
So we need to slow down. We need to get serious about fraud. And I mean serious, like people need to lose their jobs.
Yeah.
Engineers have created committees and organizations and ethical standards for themselves. And if you violate those ethical standards, you don't get to call yourself an engineer anymore. If the engineers can figure it out, I'm pretty sure the scientists can too.
Right.
Like maybe if you commit fraud, you don't get to call yourself a scientist anymore.
Right.
Maybe you lose your job, and that's just it. It's the end of the line. You lie once and you're done.
Zero tolerance.
We need zero tolerance for fraud. We need to change how we communicate with the public. We need to expose more of the actual process of science itself. Most people interact with science not through the process and the methods of science, which is the beautiful part of science and the fun part of science, but with the results.
Right.
And we need to expose people to the messiness and the nuance and the contention and the interesting
and the rigor.
And the rigor and like how I wish people knew more about how scientists arrive at conclusions rather than the conclusions themselves, because that is what is more important. And so I call on my fellow scientists to step up to the plate, to talk to people more, to come out of the ivory towers, to sit in front of people, whether it's at a giant lecture hall or just around a family dinner, and talk about the process of science. Talk about the day-to-day. Talk about the passion. Talk about what they love. Every scientist who's doing it is definitely not in it for the money. They're in it because they love this universe and they love studying this universe in some little interesting corner of this universe. And the more they share the passion, the more they share the inside, the more they share the story of how we arrive at our decisions, I think that is a good foundation for building trust.
Wonderful. And they also need to know how much we hate each other.
Yes, not you and me.
Not you and me.
We're
not
cool.
you and I. No. Because I feel like, a lot of people think that every 50 years or so, all the world scientists go into a room and it's always the same agenda. What is the lie we're all going to agree on? The earth is getting warmer. The earth is old. Those sort of things, right? People evolved. When actually, what survives to become canon is what has survived an onslaught of hate.
Yeah.
Because, if you come up with something, I hate you. I need to be the smartest one. But look, folks, I have read the book cover to cover. It is a book that is unlike any book I've ever read about science. It's a book that's definitely needed in today's world because of the problems are today's problems. They're not what happened in the past. It's about today's community. I hope people do read it who are in science. Those are the ones who are going to have the closed minds. I think because what we do is funded by you, the public.
Absolutely.
And, this book gives you an insight into what our lives are like as scientists that I think I've not seen. You have to be on the inside to know the stuff that you have in here. And it's good to get validated. I felt validated when I read something. I've seen that too. I didn't realize it. I keep silent about it. But I also think it takes a lot of guts to have written this book. You just destroyed your entire scientific career.
Yeah.
That was a joke. He hasn't. But there are
one anonymous referee.
Yeah.
So this book has gone through 3 different publishers. I wrote the first draft in the summer of 2020, at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, because I was watching this erosion of trust play out in real time, and I wanted to respond to it. And it's gone through 3 different publishers. Thank you to Roman and Littlefield for having the courage to publish this. But it was with one university press. And university presses have anonymous referees, just like a journal article, like a peer review. 2 of them loved it. One of them hated it, called it the rantings of a bitter ex-scientist who couldn't make it in academia. And I knew it. Whoever you are, maybe you're in this room right now, thank you for saying that, because I knew I struck a nerve. And I knew this is exactly the kind of attitude that we need to change, and I need to call on scientists to make our profession more trustworthy, because I love science. I want science to continue for generations to come, to have a voice in society, to have a power and a vitality in society. That's what I want, and I call on the public to hold scientists accountable. Talk to scientists and say, explain to me what you do. And if they can't explain it in a way that you can understand it, like, just slap them. Not actually, but tell them, no, that's not good enough. I paid for it. You paid for it. You paid for it. You own it. It's yours. You deserve to have science communicated to you in a way that you can appreciate and understand, and that you can continue supporting.
Have you seen this social media phenomenon known as First Amendment auditors?
No.
These are people that go around with cameras and they do things that they know are going to annoy public officials or police. And they get the police called on them, and it turns out that, you know, the police are not well trained on your constitutional rights, and so they don't perform well.
Yep.
Right? They're like, oh, show me your ID when they have no, right? Maybe we need scientific auditors.
There you go. Hold scientists to a higher standards, because we need to speak more to the public. We need to engage more. That is the foundation of trust. That is the foundation of a solid relationship. Like, communication is the key to every relationship. Scientists need to communicate more with the public, and we can do our job within the scientific sphere to keep goading and cattle prodding our peers, but the public can demand it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
Let's open the floor for questions. I'd like to applaud you for not just your performance tonight, but your guts for putting this out there. James, how are we doing this? Because I can't see the audience. Do we take questions from the floor first, or do we just go with what's on the the device
Slider.
here? Okay, let's do it. All right, so here we go. What role, this must be from James, it's anonymous. What role can science museums play in rescuing science?
That is a great question, James. I'm not just saying this because the Boston Museum of Science is so gracious to host this event, and James has been a wonderful advocate and supporter and champion of the scientific voice. Informal science education plays an absolutely critical role, because they are often person's first entry point into science. If there's some 6-year-old, they're not showing up to my lectures on electromagnetism at Columbia University. Otherwise, I wouldn't notice. Their entry point is not in a lecture hall. Their entry point is probably not even like a large public lecture. It's probably through a science museum. It's through the media, and it's through science museums. And that entry point, that love of science that we see sparked in so many kids, is so amazing. I love seeing that spark. I love seeing a kid go, oh, yeah, that's cool. Wait, how did we know that? And then boom, I've got him. And then that spark gets extinguished as they get older. And so the science museums have to be here, because that is where the spark first ignites. And then we need everybody else to keep that flame going.
Absolutely. So I love this question right here. Is there a reproducibility crisis among scientific papers that are not fraudulent in nature? If yes, how do we address that? And that is from Isaac.
Isaac, excellent question. So some of you may not have been aware, starting about 5 years ago or so, there was a crisis in many fields of science, especially psychology and neurology, called the reproducibility crisis, where it turns out the vast majority of papers would announce some result, and no one could get that same result. They could not reproduce that result, which is a backbone of science. But because we publish so much, nobody has time to copy someone else's work to see if they get the same answer. They're publishing their own work. And so something like 60 to 70% of all papers in some fields of science could not be replicated. On one hand, that's kind of okay, because we're trying to explore the universe, and there are more wrong ideas than there are right ideas, and that's fine. But that also signals, like, maybe we're writing too many papers. And while the reproducibility crisis has focused on these few narrow subsets of science, I do believe that there is a reproducibility crisis in other fields of science.
Is there a value if you redo the research of another researcher in physics and astronomy, does that paper get published?
Almost never.
Exactly.
And there's this attitude where unless you're publishing something novel, it's not worth publishing. And if you get a null result, if you get a wrong answer or you get nothing, you're encouraged not to publish that result. And so we set up a system where you have to have new results, you have to have big results, you have to have unique results. And even though we espouse this ethos where, oh no, we're always checking each other's work, we're actually not checking each other's work. A solid fraction of the papers I've written, especially earlier in my career, are probably wrong and probably should not have been written. Honest.
All right, so here's a question from Mark, forgive me if I mispronounce this, Decew, D-E-C-E-W. Of the 5 million, I already know the answer, of the 5 million papers written every year, about what percentage get read, and how many papers does a scientist read a year?
0. No, my dissertation, my PhD dissertation, is publicly available. You can search it up. You know, Paul Sutter dissertation, University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. You can find it. You can read it. There's a typo in the first paragraph. Nobody caught it. In the first paragraph, my entire PhD dissertation was read by me because I wrote it. My advisor, bless his heart, read about 3/4 of it. No one else on my tenure committee, they skimmed it, and then they did not read it. I will tell you personally, in our field of astronomy, there's a subscription service you can have. It's free. You can get a daily digest, an email that gives you the titles and abstracts of all the papers in astronomy that were published in the past 24 hours. Yeah, it's cool. There's about 40 to 60 papers published every single day. You know, so there's a few per hour being published. You get that email, you start scrolling through, you browse maybe half of it before you can't read anymore and you just move on. You might read the title. If the title looks interesting, you'll look at the authors. If you don't know any of the authors, you'll probably skip it. If you notice one of the authors and know them, then you'll read the abstract. And then you open the paper and you browse through, you read the conclusions, you look at some figures. The only time I have ever fully read a paper with the intention to understand every single sentence was when I was a graduate student, and I was really trying to understand a particular topic, and I would come back to the same paper again and again and again. The vast majority of papers in science are not read by the vast majority of scientists.
All right, so I'm gonna give you a little pushback.
Okay, please.
From Anonymous.
Please. Anonymous, very brave of you.
That's this hacking consortium.
Oh, no, okay.
All right. I believe most graduate students in STEM fields want to work in industry. I don't believe they're being lied to around career opportunities in academia. Many reputable institutions invite industry to recruit candidates. How could this be more equitable across university? Ivies to state schools.
Yeah, from Ivies all the way to state schools.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fair. And nothing I've said tonight is universal, and nothing I put in the book applies to every institution, every scientist. There are amazing science communicators out there that are trying to bring science to people and get them to, it's right here. There are institutions that recognize that there are dysfunctional relationships with students and graduate students and are trying to create career pipelines. There are people that are trying to reform the grant system from within to essentially just randomize it so it's more equitable, so it's diverse. There are people trying to bring more resources to like lower income universities or ones that don't have such high status. There are plenty of people and organizations that are trying to make a change. I'm not speaking alone, and I tried my best in my book to point out individuals, groups, organizations that are trying to solve these problems, because I'm not the only one that recognizes these issues. Some fields of science do a better job at career pipelining, for sure. Other fields of science do not. So it is not a universal blanket statement. My experience in physics and astronomy, go to any departmental website for any university for physics or astronomy and ask yourself if they point to, hey, graduate students, you can have a wonderful career in industry. You'll find essentially nothing.
Yeah. Okay, here is another one. This is a tough one. Anonymous.
Okay.
What responsibility do politicians have to uphold, not undermine, societal belief in science?
This is a tricky one, and I do cover this in the book.
Okay, so I hate that word belief in certain contexts, because I think, belief means to accept something as true without confirming it to be true, and knowledge means you've actually confirmed it to be true. And so I don't think people should be believing science. I think people should be knowing what science is, what it's not, just like we do with uncertainties and confidence intervals and that sort of thing, right? But what is your answer?
No, that's a beautiful response, actually, because science is wrong all the time. That's the entire point of science, is that we have a process for updating our beliefs. I hope scientists 100 years from now think the stuff that I have created or learned or researched is stupid and ignorant, and oh my gosh, they actually believed that kind of stuff. I hope, because that means we've made progress. And I'm much more interested in the process. I'm much more interested in the method. And that is not communicated enough to the public and is not communicated enough to politicians. And I believe that scientists can be taken advantage of and also willingly participate in a broken political system where politicians come to scientists and say, give us the answer. What do you got? And the scientists might say, oh, well, here's the answer. Oh, there are lots of caveats and there's uncertainties. And the politician will just say, thank you. We'll just put all those uncertainties over there. We'll just take your result. Thank you. Now they've taken science, which has diminishing, but still a great amount of trust, respectability, and authority, and attach that to a political program. And what is happening is that the voice of the scientists themselves is being taken from them. It's being robbed from them. I do believe that scientists need to participate in politics more. I do believe that scientists need to have an active voice and role in the political process, in our decision-making process as a community. But scientists tend to give results when asked, and then say, oh, no, politics isn't for me. No, that gets messy. And so their voice gets used and distorted and weaponized against them. And so, yes, it's true that Republicans and leaders tend to not fund science as robustly as Democratic leaders. That's true. We've had 20, 30 years of experience with this. My response to that is, well, how can we change that? How can we change it so that no matter who's on the ballot box, no matter who's in charge, that science always wins? How can science be a valuable tool for not just people, but policymakers, decision makers, political leaders, a voice at the table as we navigate very complex societal issues? Science has a role to play in that, and scientists are not playing the role that they need to play.
One of the strangest interfaces between politics and science that I discovered when I joined NASA headquarters in 2016 was that the entire NASA ship, you elect a new administration, and they're like, oh, let's go this direction.
Yep.
And I'm like, wait a minute. These things take a lot longer than 4 years to come to fruition. How can you...
Something like 60 to 70% of NASA's budget is line item directed by Congress. That means outside of NASA's control. And so we change our Congress every 2 years. We have a budget roughly every 1 year. Of course, NASA can get nothing done because the people paying for it change their minds every year, every 2 years, every 4 years. No one can get anything done in that kind of environment.
Yeah, not big things. All right, so what role does K through 12 education play in rescuing science? What core skills and competencies should we be teaching our students to engage deeply in science? And I'm going to expand that, and our teachers.
Yes. So what we consistently see is that kids get a spark for science. They start to love science. They come to a museum. They see a TV show. They fall in love with science. They want to learn more about it. And then that spark, somewhere between K and 12, very often gets snuffed out. And the people who come out at the end of it wanting a career in science do it despite the public education infrastructure, even private education infrastructure. Oftentimes, we will see stories where a kid loves science because they had a mentor, because they had someone in their community, they had a teacher, not an educational system. They had one teacher that would take them aside and say, hey, no, here's some books you should read. Hey, let's do some extra experiments. Oh, you're interested in that topic? Let me grab some other things from the library that you might be interested in. They find a champion, or the champion finds them. So what we need to do, I believe, and that's for the future scientists. Most people are not going to end up being scientists. Most people, beyond the most bare bones description of science as maybe the scientific method, you form a hypothesis and then you test and perform an experiment and then you accept or reject the hypothesis. The very basic bare bones method cannot explain how science actually works. Right. And so I think there is a role in the K through 12 public education system to expose more kids to how science operates, to how we make our decisions, to how we arrive at conclusions, and how, like you mentioned earlier, how disagreement is a core part of the scientific process. That is how we learn. Like, you can take one data set and bring it to 10 scientists and end up with 12 different conclusions. And that's a good thing, because that is how we poke at nature. That is how we try to understand. And so expressing that spirit of it's okay to disagree, that consensus doesn't come from like a kumbaya around the fire moment. It comes from us like beating each other to a bloody pulp, and then exhausted to say, okay, you know what, maybe you're kind of right.
You sound like me before I joined the federal government. I had the same thoughts. And I'm like, we should be thinking critical thought at the beginning. And then I researched into it. Mm-hmm. And it turned out we weren't the first person to think that. And why was it killed and not put in schools? Because critical thinking undermines parents and faith. Yeah. And as a parent, my stepsons critically examine my decisions all the time. So it's like an innate human nature is to question authority and then question your parents. And scientists are just kids. We just take that hey, wait a minute, how does that work? I don't believe that. Yeah, you won a Nobel Prize, but I think you're wrong about this. There's culture, man. I'm from the Deep South. I'll give an example. I wrote my memoir. My co-writer interviewed my sister. And she called me up after the interview. And she goes, so one thing that was weird about my upbringing is that we literally moved every year and sometimes multiple times a year. And so Josh, he's a Jewish dude, neurosurgeon, for a father, upper middle class. We're family. He's my big brother now. Bridget, my sister, says to me, brother, you know what Josh asked me? I'm like, what? He asked me, did you ever tell your mother that you didn't like moving so much? No explanation needed. We both bust out laughing. No, I enjoy having teeth. I would not tell no. You might can tell your parent that, but I can't tell my parent that. So this whole idea of faith undermining parents, critical thinking undermining parents, there's a lot of homes where you better not tell your parents they're wrong about something. Yep. Right? And I remember my mother pulling me to the side because I embraced the Urkel identity, right? And one way to be the smarty kid in the community is to correct people. And my mother pulled me aside, no, you don't do that. All right, so let's go to the last question. And do we have time? What are we supposed to finish?
I think we're good.
Okay, do journals have, because I can imagine if this did exist, do journals have letters to the editor, and are scientists expected to write them?
Yes, journals, most journals do have some sort of letter to the editor function or errata or news. Scientists are by and large not expected to write them because if you want to advance in a scientific career, you have to publish papers, not letters, not news items, not commentary. You are expected to publish papers, original research, units of original research. And so, yeah, letters appear every once in a while. They are not the primary mode of scientific communication.
So speaking of papers, Anonymous also asks, is there a recommended way to get access to the scientific papers? A lot are behind paywalls and limit the average person's ability to fact check for themselves.
Yeah, people complain about oil companies, these big like Exxon, we're all suffering, paying, through the nose at the pump every day, and the Exxon, double-digit profit. Okay, if you want to make real money, become an academic publisher. I am not joking. Those 5 million papers were published in journals. The content is free because the journals themselves do not create the content. It's scientists creating the content. If I want to publish in a journal, I have to pay them for the privilege. The editing is free. It's done by scientific volunteers. The peer review is done for free. The typesetting is done by software. It takes 10 minutes to typeset a paper. You maybe pay for electronic hosting. Like the journals, the academic publishing, it is 10 to 20% profit margin across the board. They rake in the money from this entire machine. And as I was ranting, I forgot what the actual question was.
How do you get access to the papers?
And part of this is not only do they take money from the scientists to create the content in the first place, they charge universities and libraries for access to the content, so they get to double dip.
Oh, and they triple dip because if you don't have an academic library to get the paper through access, there is you can just buy it off the website.
Yeah, $59.95 for an article in Nature. For one article, access to one article. Now, some journals have started shifting to something called open access, where it is publicly available, free for all. The downside of that is that they are charging much more for the scientists to publish because they still have to make their money. Heaven forbid they actually, reduce their profit margins by a little bit. But I will tell you, if you're interested in physics research or astronomy research, there is a website you can go to. arxiv.org, archive.org. This is a repository of what are called preprints, because the journal takes the copyright of the final edited piece, with all the, the fancy formatting and the referee comments and the editorial suggestions. They own the copyright to that. They do not own the copyright or possess the copyright to your original scientific output. So what every single physicist and astronomer does is they will submit a paper for publication, the Astrophysical Journal to Science or Nature or Physical Review Letters or whatever journal, and they will take a copy of that and they will upload it to this website, archive.org. And those are all free, freely accessible, and have been free and accessible since roughly 1993. Since essentially there was the internet, all physics and astronomy papers have been publicly available. And you ask yourself,
Not all.
Not all. Okay.
I never put one up.
You never put one up? What's wrong with you?
Dude, I don't like to write.
That's why I can't find you on the archive.
Yeah, I don't market myself.
Okay.
Yeah, I just like to do it and go home and then do it again.
Okay, so not all.
Yeah.
Not all.
Yeah.
And then you might ask yourself,
I have
wait
no
a minute.
ambition.
If all scientists, or most scientists, not Name Hakeem, are publishing their physics and astronomy papers online free for everyone to read, why are we bothering even submitting to journals and paying through the nose? That's a good question.
So for it to count so you can be promoted.
But the joke is, there are a few weird jokes in astronomy because we have a perverse sense of humor. One joke is that the real peer review happens when you publish the paper, when it's on the archive.
Right.
Because the actual peer review process is broken and inane. I talk about it in the book. The real peer review happens when your that your community reads your paper, or at least glances through it, and says, oh, this was wrong, this was stupid, why'd you write that? When we have that contentious debate at the conference. And the second weird joke, which gets back to the like publishing big results and fraudulent, is that you think that our journals like Nature or Science or Lancet or Cell, the big name journals, this is where all our top tier research goes. The joke is if it's in Nature, it's wrong.
Right.
That's where we put our wrong papers, because those journals only will take the big papers, the splashy announcements, the bold statements, which tend to be incorrect because we tend to push ourselves too far past the evidence. So if it's in a splashy journal, it's more likely to be a wrong paper than an article appearing in a more boring journal that you've never heard of.
All right, so here's a question from Will in Somerville, where my favorite, I forget what it was, ramen restaurant is, and where I would go and get clothes on consignment. There's a store there.
Thanks for the tip.
Yeah, I still have a raincoat I bought here in 2015. It's like, would have cost me like a lot of money, but I got it for like $40. All right, Will in Somerville, how should we talk to lay audiences about science? What framings of science will likely make people respect science more?
There's that saying, respect is earned. Trust is earned. You cannot demand respect. You cannot demand trust. What I advise all my fellow scientists and fans of science too, when you are speaking to someone who is not a fan of science or not a scientist, speak from the heart. Speak as a human. Don't speak as a scientist speaking to a non-scientist. We already have that. We call them classrooms. And that's already a structured environment. We already have that. And no one likes to be reminded of their classroom experience. They want to be talked to as humans. They want to be spoken to as valuable. They want to be spoken to as intelligent and capable. And so the more respect and admiration you show to a non-scientist, even someone who hates everything that you do, even the most ardent anti-vaxxer, I almost said virulent anti-vaxxer, which is a funny turn of phrase. The most virulent anti-vaxxer, the young earth creationist, the UFO conspiracy, whoever, if you speak to them with respect and kindness and empathy and radical empathy, the kind of empathy where you give empathy without any expectation of it coming back to you, of it being reciprocated, where you just give that and you speak from the heart, you speak about your passion, you speak about what you love, you speak about the evidence, you speak about yourself, I firmly believe that that will build more bridges.
Exactly, building bridges. That's why I pushed back a little bit earlier, because I think that, it is about building the bridge first, right? Meeting the human first where they are. And I think if you tell a story, there's the what you say to writers, show, don't tell. Yep. Right? And so if somebody comes to me and they're telling me, oh, this ain't that, right? I'll give you an example. I say this in my first TED Talk. I was standing in South Africa, in Johannesburg, at baggage claim. And I hear this loud guy who was coming there to hunt. And he says to the other guy, you sound like one of these guys who believes in science. Right? So I started listening in. And he tells the story of his daughter, who's a fourth grader, which I assume is 9 years old, like the kids on South Park, was having a chat with an older kid who was about 11. And she won the debate when she said, the Big Bang can't be real. Don't explosions destroy things? So how could the Earth have come into existence from an explosion? And my point was, he doesn't know what they don't know what the Big Bang is. They hear the phrase, but they really don't know what it is. So my way of dealing with the Big Bang, I would do this every time I taught intro astronomy. I would say, how many of you believe in the Big Bang? Right? A certain number raise their hand. I say, how many of you disbelieve in the Big Bang? An even bigger number raise their hand. And I say, it's a trick question because we don't do believe, right? So how many of you understand early universe nucleosynthesis? They're like, what? And I'm like, how many of you understand cosmic microwave background radiation? Maybe one or two will raise their hand because they've heard of it. And I'll say, okay, explain acoustic oscillations to me. Nothing, right? And I do that and I say, listen, these are the fundamental foundations of the theory of what it is. observationally. So if you don't know what they are, you're not in a position to believe or not believe. So, you know, and if you don't believe, you have to say what's wrong with that particular data or what's wrong with that particular theory. And so I'm not telling you that what you think is not true. I'm basically making you go, oh, let me think about that, right? So when are we supposed to end, man? I'm supposed to be moderating this thing.
I think that's a great place to pause tonight. Let's have another hand for Hakeem and Paul, please.
Especially Paul. Yes. I just have to say, there was he told me, don't tell me what you're going to ask me. And he just did that off the cuff with no pre-planning. So I am super impressed by this nerd.
We're super impressed by both of you. Thank you both for making the trek to Boston, for being here. Paul, congrats on the book.
Thank you.
We're going to thank all of you for being here with us on a Wednesday night and coming out and supporting. We're going to say goodnight to all of our friends who are watching online. Thank you for tuning in. And for those who are here in person, please, on your way out tonight, stop. We're going to have a book signing downstairs. You can pick up, I would say, an advance copy of Rescuing Science because it's not actually for sale yet online. So get yours now. And